Well, the Wind River Reservation in central Wyoming is home to nearly 8,000 Native Americans and about a dozen oil and gas fields. And a battle is brewing there over what to do with wastewater from some of the oil company sites. The region is largely desert wilderness, and because it's so dry, ranchers have actually fought to keep that toxic water, to have it be allowed to flow on the land. They depend on it, saying there would be no water for the livestock and other animals without it. That dirty water is better than no water. But others argue this water is toxic and would never be allowed to run on non-tribal land, and are pressuring the Environmental Protections Agency to close those loopholes that allow it to continuously spew out. RT correspondent Lori Harfiness has been following this story closely and has more from our studios in New York. So Lori, what's in the water and why is it so bad?
Yeah, so Christine, if you look at the documents from the EPA, it's this huge list of all of these chemicals with crazy names, unpronounceable words, and warnings about them that sound really, really scary. And, you know, there's some people that are saying, oh, it's not that bad. And then there's others that are, you know, just dumbfounded by it. So I actually spoke to Robert Jackson, who is a professor of environmental science over at Duke University, to ask him just what exactly the contaminants are in the water.
There were carcinogens in the water, compounds such as benzene, ethylbenzene. There were hazardous air pollutants. You mentioned hydrochloric acid, toluene. So there were really just lots of things that you don't want in the water. And to be quite honest, you don't want cattle drinking that water if the cattle are then going to be sold as meat.
And that's exactly the point, is that this water is the drinking water for cattle on this land. They're drinking it, they're wading in it, and there's a good chance that it's getting into the steak that could end up on your plate.
Yeah, I mean, that's something a lot of people don't think of. Okay, maybe these cows are not keeling over and dying because of their drinking the water, but there's a lot of long-term effects, you know, that sort of goes down the food chain, so to speak, and it is really interesting. Talk about the process here, Lori. I mean, for those in favor of closing the loopholes to prevent this toxic water, do they have any solutions for how these ranchers would get water? As we know, this is a very dry area.
Yeah, no, they don't, which is unsurprising, and that's, you know, half the battle with any of these environmental atrocities that we hear about. You hear that these horrible things are happening, and we know we should stop them, but then no solutions are proposed as to, you know, how to still help those people feed their families who are suddenly put out of business, or, you know, what is going to be the new viable source of energy. So, you know, it's a case that's much like any other environmental case where, you know, we know what's happening is bad, but no solutions are put on the table that would take it to the next step to help rectify the situation.
Now, this story is not really being covered widely, but it has been picked up by a couple media outlets. Do you think this is something that's being blown up by the media, or that there's really something here to be concerned about?
Yeah, well, you know, I always wonder the same thing whenever I see any news story. I'm going to question it. I'm going to wonder if this is just sensationalism and a way to fill time. But, you know, this case with its laundry list, again, of really horrible sounding chemicals seemed to have a little bit of meat to it. So that was another thing that I asked Professor Jackson.
I think this is sensationalism. I think this is something that, first of all, needs to stop. We need to figure out how common this is, how widespread this practice is. I mean, really, it's not just there in Wyoming. Some states in the U.S. allow the disposal of wastewater to be sprayed on lands, to be used for dust control, or even to be sent to municipal water treatment plants, which are not set up to do that. So essentially, any practice that allows people to release untreated wastewater into the environment around us is a bad idea, and it should be stopped immediately.
Affects not only the cattle, but ducks and all the aquatic life, not to mention people with the steak on the plate at dinner. So there's a lot of people and animals and aquatic life that are going to be affected by this, which to me sounds like a very valid reason to stop this practice.
Certainly a unique story with oil companies and cattle ranchers sort of on the same side here. But Lori, what's the bigger takeaway here? And you're researching this story. What's sort of the bigger picture that we should get from this?
Well, it's like anything else. You know, we've got the story about some atrocity that's being committed, and, you know, you've got the EPA, which is a government agency, and you've got big oil, and then you've got Native Americans. So it's, you know, it's got all the players in there, and it's very easy to point to big oil. It's very easy to point to the EPA. But the takeaway for me with this story is like the takeaway for any other story. It's up to us to continue this conversation, to learn about this stuff, to pass on the information, and to, as consumers and as citizens, start demanding by, you know, making better choices for ourselves and showing big companies and showing the government with our choices at the grocery store what we expect from them. You know, when not just buying anything, but taking care to buy stuff that we know is good for us. So it's about education, much like everything else.
But is there a tribal aspect here? I mean, a lot of people looking at this story and saying this would not happen if it wasn't on tribal land.
That's absolutely true, because if it didn't happen on tribal land, it would fall under the state's law, and states have much stricter regulations on this than the EPA does. Since it is on the reservation, the EPA is in control. And so it's not a matter of, oh, it's just a reservation, we can screw them. It's just a matter of that there's regulation that's federal as opposed to regulation that's state. So it's not a matter of evil. It's just a matter of, once again, a federal agency failing the people that it's supposed to serve.
Well, certainly a very interesting story with a lot of layers. RT correspondent Lori Harfinas joining us in our studios in New York. Thanks so much.